This video will take us a little off the beaten path, in that I want to talk about a different campaign setting in D&D to the Forgotten Realms. One of my favorite campaign settings of all time is Dark Sun. It was originally released in 1992, and it was very different from anything ever published prior in D&D history. Every other campaign setting prior to this was invariably some sort of high fantasy setting: Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Forgotten Realms. But Dark Sun was anything but high fantasy. High fantasy is intimately tied to the European medieval setting, and the technology, structures, and general ambiance reflect this starkly, with some variation in between. The Dark Sun setting, too, is inspired, since all works newly created drink deep of the past to animate them. But instead of the European Middle Ages, Dark Sun takes inspiration from a more distant past and reflects something that might be akin to ancient Mesopotamia some 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, with echoes of a still more ancient civilization preceding it. As a reflection of this, many concepts that are assumed to be normal and run-of-the-mill in standard high fantasy D&D are flipped on their head in Dark Sun. Athas, the name of the planet of the Dark Sun setting, is a blasted, barren world where life struggles to persist virtually everywhere, and survival itself is considered a triumph rather than a given. This is best encapsulated in a quote taken from The Wanderer, a biographer of the land of Athas. "I live in a world of fire and sand. The crimson sun scorches the life from anything that crawls or flies, and storms of sand scour the foliage from the barren ground. This is a land of blood and dust, where tribes of feral elves sweep out of the salt plains to plunder lowly caravans. Mysterious singing winds call travelers to slow suffocation in the sea of silt, and selfish kings squander their subjects' lives in building gaudy palaces and garish tombs. This bleak wasteland is Athas, and it is my home." Much of Athas is a wasteland, filled with deserts and barren landscapes. But this is not all there is. There are also great city-states ruled by powerful and immortal sorcerer kings, lying between the vast expanses of empty land, with occasional oases whose value is incalculable to life, and whose ownership is fought for to the death. Given the nature of Athas, one of the greatest treasures one can find is water, and it is guarded fiercely. Metals of any sort are incredibly rare, and a sight to behold. And thus a sword of iron is an incredible find, as it probably dates back to a time thousands of years prior to the present. And a steel blade would be absolutely priceless, beyond all reckoning, and most will never see such a thing. Most weapons and armors, in fact, are crafted from more organic materials, such as chitin and bone, or stone material, such as obsidian or flint, and even wood carved and sculpted into weaponry. Any resource that can potentially be used will be, and resources are scarce. And as a consequence, raiders are part of daily life on Athas, and anywhere outside of cities nearly guarantees encounters with raiders, slavers, and brutal beasts adapted to the environment, and far worse. Although the city-states of Athas may appear civilized by way of contrast compared to the wilderness, they too harbor their own dangers that are alien compared to most high fantasy D&D settings. Most city-states are ruled by so-called sorcerer kings, immortal beings who have mastered vastly powerful magic, as well as the mental arts of psionics, and none is kind, just, or generous. All rule through tyranny, only being individuated by the flavor of tyranny with which they rule, and all have Templar servants that act to enforce their tyranny. Templars are the priest class that serve the sorcerer kings, and though they are not gods, the Templars nonetheless receive spells from them, and they are the judges, juries, and executioners of the citizenry, and exist to maintain the order prescribed by the ruler of the city. Corruption is rife in Athas' city-states, but the Sorcerer Kings do not care a whit, as long as order is kept and maintained, and thus abuses are heaped upon the inhabitants of cities on a daily basis, with little or no heed being paid to their suffering. Although Athas has been in this state for millennia, it was not always this way, and it was once a verdant and vibrant place full of life. This changed due to wars waged in ancient times, and the magic used during this time. Unlike arcane magic in other settings, magic on Athas cannot be cast without paying a price, and the price paid is always life, usually in the form of vegetation, but sometimes living beings can be tapped into as well. And it is no secret that magic, and specifically what is called Defiler magic, has been responsible for the blasted and bleak landscape of Athas as it stands today. Defiler magic taps into the land and sucks it dry, taking all and returning nothing. Most wizards are defilers, and with every spell they cast, the leaves and flowers wither in their wake, and for this reason they are universally hated by virtually all beings on Athas. However, not all magicians must follow the path of the Defiler, and there's another type of magic that seeks to preserve rather than destroy, aptly named Preserver magic. Preserver magic is more difficult to master than Defiler magic, taking longer, and requiring more dedication, because Preserver magic does not damage the land whatsoever. However, Preserver wizards are very rare, and it is a common misunderstanding that all magic necessarily defiles the land, and thus when common folk and non-magic users find a wizard, they are usually killed or driven off, with no questions asked. Clerics, too, exist on the burnt world of Athas, but there are no gods. For reasons beyond anyone's understanding, the metaphysics of the crystal sphere encapsulated in Athas do not permit divine beings to contact mortals, much less garner their worship. Instead, clerics worship the elements, air, earth, fire, and the most important element of all, water. The elemental planes bear close connection to Athas, and clerics learn to tap into the elements, and they sometimes even learn to tap into the para-elements, such as magma, ash, or ooze. They are commonly referred to as elemental priests, and they rarely live in cities, as they are unwelcome there, but instead live in the hinterlands, often tending to villages and caravans. Unlike wizards, clerics are highly respected in Athas, as their magic does not defile the land, and priests of water are the most venerated of them all, prized for their ability to find and produce this life-saving element. Slavery is rampant on Athas and part of daily life, and cities are full of slaves who serve as the major labor force in all urban areas, and thus the profession of slaver is ubiquitous. Slavers will venture out into the Badlands to find new slaves to sell at markets, and much of the Athasian economy runs on slavery. Slaves work as household servants, fighters in gladiatorial games, and exist for the pleasure of their masters. And in the bleak world of Athas, many slaves are specially trained to fight in large gladiatorial arenas, to serve as entertainment for the masses, in order to distract them from the misery of their lives. Corruption is rampant as well, and very few people are truly free citizens. Although magic is distinct on Athas, and consequently viewed very differently, one power is nigh universal in the Dark Sun setting, and that is the power of the mind, referred to as psionics. Virtually all creatures on Athas possess some rudimentary power of the mind, from the fierce but near mindless beasts that roam the wastelands, to the sophisticated masters of psionic academies, and everyone in between. Psionics is extremely common, far more common than even magic is in other settings, and its power is used by both the trained and untrained in their daily lives. Some cities even run academies, where the few of wealth who can afford it are enlisted so as to learn how to hone their natural abilities to ever greater heights. Despite the nature of the setting, or perhaps because of it, Athas practically begs to be explored, in particular because of the great mysteries of the past, seemingly forever lost to time, and in some cases, actively suppressed by the Sorcerer Kings. Now I realize it is a long shot, indeed, a massively long shot, but I am of the view that Dark Sun could really use a modern game, and that the setting would be incredibly interesting. There have been Dark Sun video games in the past, but they are 30 years old now. The combination of unique history with a significantly differentiated setting would make for a truly incredible experience, and simply begs for a modern realization. Of course, I obviously harbor no illusions about the likelihood of such a project, but I certainly would support it if some developers, say, wanted to start a Kickstarter campaign, and I would be positively enthralled if a major developer wished to develop a Dark Sun game. Dungeons & Dragons seems to be coming into vogue these days, especially among those not previously familiar with it, but the settings are always high fantasy, usually Forgotten Realms or homebrewed spin-offs of traditional D&D, which is why I think Dark Sun could be particularly liberating in this regard. Not that I have anything against high fantasy, just that a different flavor would be very much welcome. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel, and I'll check you out next time. Take care.